I only wanted to help you.
Emily, do you have any idea who that man is? She doesn't, but soon, everyone will.
The moment I greeted the deaf old man in sign language, the entire lobby went silent. 10 minutes later, security was ordered to remove him. By lunchtime, my internship was in danger. And before sunset, I discovered the quiet stranger everyone had ignored could bring the whole company to its knees. Hello, my name is Emily Carter. I was 24 years old when this happened, and I had just started an internship at Whitmore Dynamics in Chicago. Whitmore was the kind of company people dreamed about joining. It designed medical communication technology, including emergency alert systems, captioning software, and devices meant to help people with hearing loss. Its headquarters occupied 40 floors of a glass tower beside the Chicago River. Everything inside looked expensive, polished, and slightly cold. I had worked hard to get there, but from my first day, I felt invisible. I spoke softly, avoided arguments, and rehearsed simple sentences in my head before saying them out loud. The other interns seemed born for corporate life. They interrupted meetings with confident ideas, laughed with executives, and competed to be noticed. I usually stayed near the end of the table and took careful notes. My supervisor, Vanessa Cole, noticed my quiet nature immediately. "You need sharp elbows if you want to survive here," she told me. "Kindness is fine on weekends. In this building, results matter." Vanessa was the director of corporate communications. She wore perfect suits, remembered powerful people's names, and forgot everyone else's. She often gave my research to another intern named Tyler and let him present it as his own. When I objected once, she smiled and said, "Ideas belong to the team, Emily. Don't become difficult." So I became even quieter. There was one thing no one at Whitmore knew about me. I was fluent in American Sign Language. My younger brother, Noah, had lost most of his hearing after a severe illness when he was 3. My family learned sign language together. Noah taught me that communication was not only about words. It was about attention. It was about looking at someone and letting them know they mattered. That lesson followed me into Whitmore's lobby on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had arrived early because Vanessa wanted printed briefing folders before 9. As I crossed the marble floor, I saw an older man standing at the reception desk. He was probably in his 70s. His gray coat was wet from the rain, and he held an old leather folder against his chest. He tried to communicate with the receptionist, but she kept speaking louder, as if volume could solve everything. "Do you have an appointment?" she repeated. The man pointed to his ears, shook his head, and signed that he was deaf. The receptionist sighed and looked toward a security guard. "Sir, you can't wear if you don't have an appointment." Several employees walked past. Some stared. Most looked away. I should have kept moving. Vanessa had warned us never to be late. But I remembered Nolt standing a event while adults spoke around him instead of to him. I placed the briefing folders on a nearby table, stepped toward the man, and signed, "Good morning. My name is Emily. May I help you?" His tired face changed instantly. "You sign," he replied. "My brother is deaf," I explained. "Who are you here to see?" He looked around the vast lobby, then signed, "I'm here to see whether this company still remembers why it exists." That was not the answer I expected. He told me his name was Arthur Bell. He had no appointment, but he carried documents for the CEO, Jonathan Whitmore. He asked me to help him reach the executive floor. Before I could answer, Vanessa's heels struck the marble behind me. "Emily, what are you doing?" I turned and saw her standing beside Tyler. Behind them was Jonathan Whitmore himself, surrounded by 2 senior executives. The CEO was in his early 50s, tall and serious, with silver beginning to show at his temples. He was watching Arthur and me carefully. "This gentleman needs assistance," I said. Vanessa barely looked at Arthur. "Reception and security handle visitors. You handle the briefing folders." Arthur signed to me, asked the CEO if the name Samuel Bell means anything to him. I hesitated. Vanessa's expression warned me not to continue. But the CEO had seen the exchange. Jonathan asked. I translated. For 1 second, the CEO lost his polished expression. His face went pale. Then Vanessa stepped between us. "Mr. Whitmore, your board call begins in 6 minutes. I'll have security resolve this." Jonathan looked at Arthur again, but one executive whispered something into his ear. After a tense pause, he entered the private elevator without answering. Vanessa turned on me as soon as the doors closed. "Conference room. Now." Inside, she shut the door and dropped the folders onto the table. "You embarrassed this department in front of the CEO." I only translated. "You involved yourself in a security matter." I wasn't threatening anyone. Her eyes narrowed. "Your role is to observe, not interfere. One more incident, and your internship ends." When I returned to the lobby, Arthur was gone. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. At noon, I found a small envelope beneath my keyboard. There was no name on the front. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else saw an inconvenience. If you want to know what Whitmore Dynamics was built to do, look at patent 7-441-908. Then ask why Samuel Bell's name disappeared. The note was signed with a single letter A. My hands started trembling. I searched the public patent database during lunch. Patent 7-441-908 described an emergency communication system for deaf and hard-of-hearing users. It combined visual alerts, vibration signals, and text instructions during fires, storms, and other emergencies. The Whitmore Dynamics had made millions from later versions of that technology. The patent listed two inventors, Jonathan Whitmore and Samuel Bell. But the company's official history mentioned only Jonathan. According to its website, he had created the original system after witnessing a deaf student miss a fire alarm in college. There was no Samuel Bell. There was no Arthur Bell. I searched older newspaper archives. After an hour, I found a scanned article from 28 years earlier. The photograph showed a young Jonathan beside a smiling deaf engineer named Samuel Bell. The article called Samuel the technical mind behind their prototype. It also mentioned Samuel's father, Arthur, a community advocate who had recruited deaf volunteers to test it. My breath caught. The old man in the lobby was not a confused visitor. He was the father of Whitmore's forgotten co-founder. Before I could read more, appeared behind me. What are you researching? I closed the window too late. He had seen the name Samuel Bell. Nothing, I said. Tyler smiled, but there was no friendliness in it. Vanessa says curious interns am unemployed interns. That afternoon, my access to the company archives stopped working. The next morning, Vanessa called me into her office. Tyler was already sitting there. On her desk was a printed security report. It claimed I had tried to escort an unauthorized stranger into a restricted elevator. That isn't true, I said. Security footage shows you speaking with him. Speaking to someone is not a violation. You encouraged him to approach the CEO. He asked me to translate one question. Vanessa leaned back. Sign this acknowledgement, and we'll consider the matter closed. I read the document. It said Arthur had behaved aggressively, and that I had ignored instructions from reception. Neither statement was true. I won't sign a lie. Tyler gave a quiet laugh. Vanessa's face hardened. Then you leave me no choice. You're suspended pending review. I packed my desk while employees pretended not to watch. It felt like every fear I had carried into that building had come true. I had spoken once, and the company had crushed me for it. Outside, rain covered the sidewalks. As I reached the corner, a black sedan pulled beside me. The rear window lowered, and Arthur sat inside. He signed, "I'm sorry. I hope the company had changed." I stared at him. "Did you leave the note?" He nodded and invited me to a nearby cafe. The Arthur brought a small tablet so we could type whenever our signing needed clarification. Over coffee, he told me the story Whitmore had buried. Samuel Bell had been Arthur's only son. He had been deaf since birth and became a gifted electrical engineer. In graduate school, Samuel met Jonathan Whitmore, a talented salesman with a wealthy family and strong connections. Together, they designed an emergency alert system that could save lives. Samuel built the hardware and much of the software. Jonathan found investors. At first, they were equal partners. Then Samuel became ill with an aggressive form of cancer. During treatment, Jonathan convinced him to sign temporary voting documents so the company could continue operating. Samuel trusted his friend. 3 months later, Samuel discovered that his ownership had been diluted almost to nothing. Key design records had been moved into a new corporation controlled by Jonathan's family. The company offered Samuel a small settlement in exchange for silence. Samuel refused. He planned to sue, but he died before the case reached court. Arthur, grieving and without enough money for a long legal battle, accepted a limited agreement that protected Samuel's inventor credit and required the company to maintain an accessibility program. They followed it for a few years. Arthur signed. Then the history changed. His name disappeared. Deaf employees were pushed out. Accessibility became advertising. "Why did you come back now?" I asked. Arthur opened the leather folder. Inside were letters, contracts, laboratory notebooks, and an original shareholder agreement. He explained that Samuel's widow had recently died. While clearing her home, Arthur found a sealed box of records. One document showed that Samuel's ownership had never been legally transferred. Jonathan's lawyer had filed an altered version after Samuel became too sick to challenge it. If the document was genuine, Arthur controlled a significant claim against the company. But he wanted more than money. "I want the truth recorded before I die," he signed. "I want young deaf engineers to know Samuel existed." I asked why he had approached me. Arthur's answer changed everything. "Because the CEO was watching you," he said, "and because he looked ashamed." But Jonathan Whitmore was not the young founder who had betrayed Samuel. That had been Jonathan's father, Richard. Jonathan had inherited the company and the story Richard created. Arthur believed Jonathan knew part of the truth, but not all of it. I agreed to help organize the records. I was not a lawyer or investigator, but I understood communication research, and I knew how Whitmore presented its public history. For the next 3 days, I compared dates, press releases, patent filings, and board records. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Vanessa had led a campaign 2 years earlier to remove Samuel's name from an anniversary exhibit. Internal notes described him as a complicated legacy risk. A planned scholarship for deaf engineering students had been redirected into a luxury sponsor event. Worse, recent complaints from deaf employees had vanished from the company's annual inclusion report. Someone was not simply hiding old history. Someone was continuing the betrayal. Then I received a message from Tyler. He said he felt guilty and wanted to meet. We chose a crowded restaurant. Tyler arrived looking nervous. He admitted Vanessa had told him to watch me and report anything involving Samuel Bell. In return, she had promised him a permanent job. She already knew Arthur might come, he said. Legal has been tracking him for months. He handed me a flash drive. These are copies of emails Vanessa asked me to delete. I did not trust him, but I took the drive. That night, Arthur and I opened it on an old laptop disconnected from the internet. The emails showed Vanessa communicating with Martin Hale, Whitmore's chief legal officer. They had discussed offering Arthur money, discrediting him as confused, and preventing him from reaching Jonathan. One message said, "The CEO must not see the Bell originals before the shareholder vote." Another ordered security to rewrite the lobby incident report. The shareholder vote was in 4 days. Jonathan planned to merge Whitmore with a larger corporation. If the ownership records became public before the vote, the deal could collapse. Now I understood the urgency. I also understood why my internship had been suspended. I had become a witness. The next morning, Tyler called me in a panic. Security had searched his desk. Vanessa knew the emails were missing. 20 minutes later, I received a formal letter accusing me of stealing confidential information and threatening legal action if I contacted company employees. Fear took over. I imagined lawsuits, debt, and the end of my career before it had even begun. Arthur saw it on my face. He signed, "You can walk away. You have already done more than anyone." I thought about Noah. I thought about all the times people had spoken over him, ignored him, or treated access like a favor. Whitmore sold products using people like my brother as inspiration while silencing the deaf man who had helped build the company. No, I signed. We'll finish this. Arthur's attorney verified the original documents and prepared an emergency court filing. Tyler agreed to provide a sworn statement, but we still needed to place the evidence directly in Jonathan's hands before Vanessa and Martin controlled the story. The annual shareholder meeting gave us one chance. It was held in Whitmore's largest auditorium, with investors attending in person and online. I could not enter as an employee, but Arthur held shares through Samuel's estate. His attorney secured our admission minutes before the meeting began. Vanessa saw us from across the lobby. Her confident expression cracked. She hurried toward security and pointed at me. 2 guards blocked our path. "This woman is under investigation for theft," Vanessa announced loudly. "Remove her." Everyone turned to look. For a second, I became the shy intern again. My throat closed. My hands felt cold. Then Arthur touched my arm and signed one word. "Truth." I raised my voice. "Before you remove us, ask Ms. Cole why she falsified a security report and hid evidence from her own CEO." The lobby became silent. Vanessa stepped close. "You have no idea what you're doing." "For once," I said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." Jonathan emerged from the auditorium with several board members. He looked from me to Arthur. He ordered. Martin Hale objected, but Jonathan repeated himself. Arthur walked onto the stage beside me. Hundreds of people watched. Cameras carried the meeting to thousands more. Jonathan offered Arthur a chair and asked what he wanted to say. Arthur looked at me. I interpreted his signs for the room. "My name is Arthur Bell. My son, Samuel Bell, designed the foundation of the technology that built this company. His work saved lives. His partner stole his ownership while he was dying. Then this company erased his name." Murmurs spread through the auditorium. Martin rushed toward the microphone. "These are unverified allegations." Arthur's attorney stood and announced that authenticated originals had been filed with the court that morning. Then Tyler entered through the rear doors with an independent investigator from the board's audit committee. He had sent the emails directly to the committee before Vanessa could stop him. The screens behind us changed. Vanessa's messages appeared one after another: instructions to alter the visitor report, hide Arthur's letters, delete employee complaints, and keep the CEO uninformed. Vanessa did not look powerful anymore. She looked trapped. Jonathan read the messages in silence. Then he turned to Martin. "Did you authorize this?" Martin tried to blame Vanessa. Vanessa immediately blamed him. Within seconds, the two people who had worked together to hide the truth began exposing each other. Jonathan stopped the shareholder meeting and suspended them both. Security escorted them out through the same lobby where they had tried to remove Arthur. That was not the end of the justice, but it was the beginning. The merger was delayed. An independent investigation found that Martin and Vanessa had concealed ownership evidence, manipulated internal reports, and retaliated against employees. Both were fired. Martin later faced criminal charges related to evidence destruction and fraudulent filings. Vanessa was sued for defamation and interference. Her carefully built reputation collapsed under the weight of her own emails. The board reached a settlement with Samuel's estate. Arthur did not take control of Whitmore, though he could have demanded far more than he did. Instead, he required the company to establish the Samuel Bell Center for Accessible Technology, fund scholarships for deaf engineers, restore Samuel's name to every official company history, and create an independent accessibility council led mostly by deaf professionals. Jonathan publicly acknowledged his father's betrayal. It nearly cost him his position, but he did it anyway. At the press conference, he said that inheriting a company did not mean inheriting the right to hide its sins. Then he turned to Arthur and apologized in sign language. His signing was slow and imperfect, but Arthur understood. A week later, Jonathan asked me to meet him. I expected an apology and perhaps permission to finish my internship. Instead, he offered me a full-time role helping build the new Accessibility Council. Why me? I asked. I'm not an executive. I was barely an intern. He answered, everyone important in that lobby knew how to protect the company. You were the only person who remembered who the company was supposed to protect. I accepted, but only after asking for one condition: deaf employees and community members would make the real decisions. I would help communicate their work, not speak over them. Arthur became the council's first honorary chair. Tyler cooperated with the investigation and apologized to me. I forgave him eventually, but I did not pretend his choices had been harmless. Trust, like communication, requires more than words. 6 months later, we opened the Samuel Bell Center. Noah attended the ceremony. He stood beside Arthur beneath a large photograph of Samuel holding the original emergency alert prototype. Around them were young deaf students, engineers, families, and employees who finally saw themselves represented inside the company. Arthur looked at me and signed, "Samuel would have liked you." I could not answer immediately. My eyes filled with tears. All my life, I had believed courage belonged to loud people. I thought leaders were those who commanded rooms, spoke without hesitation, and never appeared afraid. I know better now. Courage can be a shy intern crossing a lobby. It can be an old man returning after decades of pain. It can be one honest greeting in a language everyone else chose to ignore. I did not change Whitmore dynamics because I was powerful. I changed it because, for one important moment, I paid attention. And that is the truth I will never forget. Sometimes justice does not begin with a shout. Sometimes it begins when one person finally looks at someone the world has ignored and says, "I see you."